Hi, everybody. This is Rob Packard from the Medical Device Academy. Today's webinar is going to be explaining how to review, edit, and implement our labeling procedure. Our labeling procedure is SYS-030, and it's a good example of one of our procedures, but we've made some changes in the last couple of months while we weren't recording some videos in the way that we roll out our turnkey quality system. What we were finding is a lot of companies are struggling with, we don't have Dropbox, we don't use Dropbox. And that's how we were delivering the product to people. So we needed to come up with another option. The other problem that we were seeing is the video files that we have were just too large for the bandwidth limitations of sharing everything through Dropbox when people aren't part of our network. So if you were in our company, no problem. But if you were outside our company and we keep on sharing these links with large bandwidth files, it was being a problem. So we came up with a solution that combines a couple of tools that we use all the time. And I'm going to show that to you. And this is being rolled out for all our procedures. The way you're going to know that it's been implemented is you have to actually read the procedure. So I'm going to show you that firsthand. But that's how you know this has been implemented for that procedure, because it tells you right in the procedure, and I'll show you where. So here we go. We're going to share our screen. So this is the thumbnail for this particular training. It's a live training. We're going to keep it up there for a little while so people will see this, and then we'll pull it down, but the training will still be available to everybody that purchased this labeling procedure, and the rest of you, you got lucky because you watched it live. Okay, so when you purchase our procedures, we have a Dropbox folder. This is what's in the Dropbox folder now. In all of our procedures where we've done a recording in the past, we had a subfolder with some recordings in there. An MP4 file, an MP3 file for the actual audio part, and then we would also have text files in there. But we're going to move away from doing that and making that available to people, and instead what we're going to be making available to them is we're going to be making available our YouTube link to the video instead. So instead of hosting all the videos on YouTube, instead of hosting all the videos on our Dropbox folder where it takes up a ton of space, instead we're going to use YouTube space and we're going to host it there. We still have the recordings, we still have the originals. We can provide it to you in other formats if you can't go to YouTube and you're one of the people that is located in a place where you can't use YouTube. We have other solutions, and contact us. But in order to keep the size of the Dropbox down so it's easier to share Dropbox, we're leaving the videos out of the folders that we share with you. So you just have forms and templates and logs. You get the native slide deck that I'm presenting right now, and you get the procedure. So in this case, the procedure is the labeling one, SYS-030. It's version 6 of our drafts. I've updated some other files, these templates for the IFU, instruction for use and label. We've also got this training presentation I'm presenting, and then we've got a couple of checklists that I've updated as well. But this is the other way we're going to roll this out to people. We're going to use Monday.com. Monday.com is a project management software tool. There are lots of different project management software tools out there, but we chose this particular one because we could share it for free with our customers as a guest. So they don't have to pay for anything. So you can use it, and you can use it on multiple platforms. You can use it on your phone, you can use it on your desktop, you can use it on your laptop, you can use it on a Chromebook. And yes, I know it works on all those because I have done it on all those. And we know it also works on Mac and PC versions because we have a couple of people on our team that also use Macs. So lots of different options to make it more accessible to people. The screen that I'm showing here shows an example of our free procedure. It's an example procedure we make available. You can download it from our website. It's for the management review process. And the first little screen capture I put at the top is showing you an example of a board within a project. So projects have lots of different sections to them, different phases to them, and then they have these smaller sections, a individual phase that they'll call a board in Monday.com. And you can add tasks to that board, and you can add subtasks to each task. All you have to do to add a subtask is right next to the task. If you hover over that, a little arrow symbol will appear, and it'll allow you to click on that and add more tasks below that'll be clearly subtasks, and they're indented in such a way you can see that they're subtasks. In this particular case, I'm also showing you this particular one, this little comment right here. So if you click on that, you can open it up and you can see all the updates and comments that have been made. There's one comment there that is available for viewing. And in addition, you have all the files that would be in Dropbox are shared here. And originally, I had a whole bunch of other garbage in there, some thumbnails and stuff that you don't need because they're already in the files. So I moved them to our archives, and now it's simplified. So now you just have those 5 files, and those 5 files match our previous page here. So we actually have 6 here for the labeling one, but for the manager review, we just have 5. And part of the reason for that is the different number of templates. We have 2 checklists and we have 2 templates. Here we have a training video on how to do manager reviews and improve your manager review process. And we have a procedure webinar, just like the one we're doing here, explaining how to review and edit and implement your manager review procedure. And we have an org chart procedure. So it's just different attachments. The second screen capture we show you here is showing one of the videos. So when you click on this blue bubble here, you will see an update. And the first update, it actually has 2 updates, so you have to click on see more. But the first one gives you the video telling you how to conduct a manager review. And the second one tells you how to review, edit, and implement the procedure. So that's the second one over here. And then this third highlight is if you click on these files up here, if you click on the +6 and expand it fully, you can see what files are attached. So that's what you get when you're in Monday.com. And we can attach as many procedures as a company wants, and we can attach them as you purchase them, or we can do it in phases. Like phase 1, you make your first installment. For the first month of implementing your turnkey quality system, we'll put in 1 set of procedures. And that'll be 1 board, and it can have subtasks as well. And then we'll have a second board, and then we'll have a third board and a fourth board, depending on how many months you're going to implement your project over. And it makes sense to break it into small chunks. Think of it as homework. We're training you on how to implement a turnkey quality system. We say, for the next 2 weeks, you need to review these 2 new procedures, and you have to review them and make edits according to the checklist. And then once you've made edits, you can ask us questions and then finalize the procedure. And we'll always stay 1 step ahead of you with a couple more procedures. So if you're ever having a meeting every week, we'll give you the procedures for the next week. If you're having meetings every other week, we'll give you procedures for the next 2 weeks, or we could give you procedures for the next month because you paid for the whole month. This shows you how we share. So if we make it a private board, a private project, it's just within our company, we only have the left-hand side of this screen appears. If we decide to make it a shareable one so we can share it outside of our company, this right-hand side suddenly appears, and that's where we type in email for whoever you want us to share the board with, and we can easily delete and add people just by typing in their email or clicking X next to the name, so we remove them if they're no longer working on the project. In addition to that, The owners are the people on the left-hand side that have the blue crowns. So if it's a gray crown, they're on our team, they have access, but they can't do certain things like add people to this and change the status of it, copy it, things like that. So there are certain roles and functions that you can't take if you're not the owner. So typically you'll see me as an owner, Becca Taylor, who's the person that sends you the invoices, and Lindsay Walker, who's our director of sales. And those are the people you would contact most of the time if you had a problem with accessing any of the things. So we want to make sure those three people have access to all the files in money.com so they can share them quickly with you. Now, in addition to delivering the procedures to you, another advantage of doing this in money.com is that now we can also track the training and implementation of a new procedure. So you could create a sub board or create a board for implementing each of your procedures if you wanted to. And if you were going to break it down into tasks, you might say first, revise and edit the procedure that we give you, that template. Next, you would identify the job functions and roles and responsibilities that are going to use that procedure, because those are the people that need training on it. Next, you would determine what kind of training they need. And there are three types of training issues you need to discuss. One, what records do we need for training? Number two, how are we going to make sure the training was effective? Are we going to have a quiz or something? Or are we just going to have them sign a date they read and understood it? And the third possibility is competency. So if it's an internal auditing procedure, the person has to be a qualified lead auditor. Well, where is your competency evidence for that person being competent as a lead auditor? Have they been observed by another lead auditor that signed off, yes, this person's competent? Were they working in a previous job and they have it in their work experience and it's in their resume? How do you know that person's competent? It's sort of like when you have a driver's license, that's a record that you can drive. When you take the exam for the driving program to get your driver's license, that exam is the effectiveness. The competency is when you go out on a road course and they actually see if you can actually drive without hitting cones and things. And then the whole process is documented by giving you a license. So you have a record, you have a certificate, but there's a process that's behind that. So do you have a certificate that says you took an exam, or do you have a certificate that says you drove a car? Different types of exams, different types of certificates. The next thing on the list, update your job descriptions and training requirements for each person with a role and responsibility. So now that you've decided what training is required for different types of roles and what records and effectiveness and competency, now update the job descriptions to match that. You would also update your training matrix. We have a matrix in the training procedure that lists all the procedures and all our webinars, and then in the different columns, you would put the different roles and responsibilities. So you can track easily in a matrix, what things does each role and responsibility have to have for training, because only a few people are going to need training in everything, like the quality manager. The next thing is after you have identified the job functions and roles and responsibilities, you determine the training requirements, you updated the job descriptions, now you're ready to route the revised procedure to the people that are responsible for reviewing and approving that procedure. And it might not always be the same, but in the procedure, it says who is supposed to review and approve each procedure, and it's not always the same. Usually, at a minimum, it would be the process owner and quality. If you have a procedure that says it's going to be more than that, then you follow your procedure. Some companies have a matrix and say what types of procedures require what kinds of roles for review and approval. So you either follow your procedure, or at a minimum, whoever the process owner is for that procedure and quality. And the reason why quality, because they're supposed to make sure that everybody is following the requirements of the quality management system, and if they're not familiar with certain procedures, they can't enforce that. They also want to make sure that, this procedure references that other procedures. They need to be familiar at that level too. The next thing is you would create a training project board, or a group. Like this is a group that's part of a larger project. So you either create a separate project for that, or you create a separate group, and it would be for training the people on this new procedure now that you're releasing it. And you might invite people to be required. And I showed you on, if you happen to be using Monday, you could use this board guest feature, or if they're within your company and you own the board, you could put them on the left-hand side, but not have them be owners. They're just people that you're inviting to participate. So that's how you would invite them for the training. I like to do the training before I release the procedure, so you might move that up in the list before review, root, final draft, and review, because the reason why I like to do that is because I want to make sure that people that are going to use the procedure give me input on it before we make it final. They do the job. They know how the job is done, so they might say, hey, this would work better. If this isn't clear, could you explain this section better? Could you put in an example? Could you have more room in this form? Those are some examples of the kind of feedback I used to getting from people. So I like to do training with the people before I release the procedure, before I do the final review and approval. And that way, we're editing something that's had their input instead of giving them no input. Next, we need training records for all these people. So you could create a task in whatever project management tool you're using for training records for each person. If you're using Monday.com, you can create subtasks. And this is one where I just clicked on the little arrow and I created 3 subtasks. And for the purposes of the example, I've got me as a training record, Becca as a training record, and Lindsay as a training record. And I just used 3 different statuses here. This is just an example, not real. But I have the person that's responsible for the training record. So each of us are responsible for filling out our own training record. And I said, well, if we do the training today on February 17th, and we give them 30 days for training, which a lot of companies like to do, then that would be March 19th, because February only has 28 days. And I marked my status as done. If you set it up the way I did it in Monday.com, it will automatically show a checkbox instead of an open circle, and it'll cross out the date saying it's done. And you can go one step further. You can have whatever the status is of each subtask automatically reflected in the status of sub-items in the task above it. So the parent task can show all the status of the subtask without having to look at the detail. You can just look at the status bar that's a colored bar. And if it's all green, then they're all done. And it will automatically adjust that based on what the status is. Working on it means presumably Becca's working on her training. She started it, but she isn't done yet. It takes a while to read these procedures and maybe take a quiz. Maybe there's some additional work that needs to be done to show competency. And then for Lindsay, she might have a question. She might change the status to stuck. So the person that's responsible for rolling out this new procedure, the process owner, says, oh, Lindsay's stuck in her training. Let me see what it is. And there's a little blue box there, or a little blue bubble. I can click on that and see what Lindsay's question was, and I can answer her question. And I can even create a separate status category that's responded to your question. So that's how you can use this, sort of like a learning management system has all these different features, so you can track the release of new procedures, new and revised procedures, track the training records. But this allows you to do it all in Monday.com and have flexibility how you're going to set it up. And if you want to use our system and use it the way we're showing, you could implement your entire quality system through this Monday.com solution with our procedures, and we can help you as you go through that and give you advice on it. And then once you've completely implemented your quality system, then you can decide, do I like this solution, or do I want to migrate over to some other LMS system, learning management system, or some other EQMS. You don't have to throw out the procedures. you might just automate the tasks with an EQMS. That's what EQMS systems do. They automate the things that you're doing manually. So all these manual tasks of adding a task, copying a task, changing the status of a task, those are all manual. If you automate that, now it's more of an EQMS system. Okay, now we're going to get into the guts of how to revise and edit and implement the labeling procedure specifically. And this checklist goes with all of our procedures. You start with updating the logo. So on the top of our procedures, we have a logo. You update that. Next thing, it has a version number. All the version numbers begin with 0. That means they're a draft. When they become 1.0, that's the initial release. When it becomes 1.1, you've made a minor revision that does not require retraining. If it goes to 2.0, that means retraining is required because it's a significant change. You enter the effective date. As I said, I like the effective date to be after training. Some people will say that the effective date is after 30 days after approval of the procedure. So they'll approve it today, let's say February 17th, and they'll have the effective date is March 19th because that's when the training requirement is done. But if they had done the training before they released the procedure, then they could have it be effective immediately. And that would be the preferred way. But that isn't the way most companies do it. Most companies review and approve it first, say you're only allowed to access reviewed and approved procedures, and you should train on the reviewed and approved procedure, and it becomes effective in 30 days, giving you a 30-day grace period to be trained. The next thing you should be updating is the author name. It appears in 2 places, one in the version history, one in the top right-hand corner. The version history will have previous authors as well as the current author, whereas the top right-hand corner in the header only has the current author. This is the person that made this revision, not the person that originally wrote the document. Next, update references to other procedures. Oh, I skipped one, sorry. Update the company name. So wherever you see company name in brackets, you're going to remove the brackets and replace company name with your company name. And you can do that with the search and replace function in Word. Just search for in brackets company name and replace it with your company name without the brackets. Next, update references to other procedures. If you only are buying one of our procedures or a couple of our procedures have references to other procedures that you won't have, so you're going to need to update all the numbering and references to match your system. If you buy our complete turnkey quality system, you only need to delete things that aren't applicable to your company. So if you don't have sterilization, you delete all the sterilization references. Next, we have a flow chart. It's a very simple flow chart, inputs and outputs, and a black box in the middle that is the procedure or the process. So you're going to update that process flow diagram to reflect the procedures in your quality system instead of ours if you didn't buy our complete system. And there might be some things that are not applicable. Next, updating titles. This is one of the tasks that I was talking about as a or one of the tasks that's involved in reviewing and editing procedures. I can go back a slide here. It's this second function here, identify job functions and roles and responsibilities. So you need to figure out who is going to be responsible for doing the things in the procedure, who needs training and who needs retraining. So that should be specifically spelled out in the procedure. There's a section for responsibilities and authorities, and there's another section for training and retraining. Things that are unique to our procedures, we have a section for metrics. So in 1345, you're supposed to monitor and measure processes. Well, we have a section just for that. You do not have to copy what we have as a metric. You can put in your own metrics, but you should have some way of monitoring and measuring the process and update that. If you don't want the metrics in the procedure, so you have to update the procedure whenever you change it, then you can put it in some log or some spreadsheet, but somewhere you have to document what you're going to measure for each process. Next, you're going to update the record storage locations. I'll show you where that is, but in the records section, there's hyperlinks for where you are storing the documents. If you're not storing them electronically, you're going old school and paper copies, then you're going to say where physically those paper copies are. And the last thing we have is removal and adding references to regulatory requirements. So you'll see in this procedure, we have Canadian requirements, European requirements, US requirements. If you don't do business in one of those countries, you delete those references. If you also do business in, let's say, Brazil, Australia, and Japan, you would add those references, which I did not include. In general, our procedures have in them US, European, and Canadian requirements, and don't have other markets unless a company hires us specifically to add that for like MDSAP. Okay, this is a screen capture of what's in actually ISO 1345 2016, showing the requirements. A lot of people are like, I don't know where the labeling section is. It's literally a single word that says labeling in this section. So I highlighted it. It says in very vague high-level terms, you have to have procedures for implementing your labeling operations. That's it. It doesn't say how. It doesn't give you any more structure. Really, probably one of the weaker sections of the entire standard would be that section right there, because labeling has so much complexity to it, and you have translations, it probably should be expanded. So if the committee's listening, next time you update 1345, I would add a subsection like 7.5.2 specifically for labeling, and maybe a couple of those other sections could be broken out as well. Maybe product release, especially for software, maybe delivery and post-delivery activities, maybe some post-market surveillance could be referenced. Never know. Okay, here's what the FDA has, and this is where I think there's a problem. The FDA has said we're going to incorporate by reference all of ISO 1345, and we're getting rid of the current QSR and we're replacing it with a QMSR that doesn't have specific labeling requirements. So this is part of my concern here. They may add that later to the QMSR, but it's an area of weakness. I think this is one of the stronger sections of the QSR, where it talks about label integrity, label inspection, storage, operations, and control. You should have each of those things covered in your labeling procedure. I would also cover translation if you're doing anything outside the US or doing it in markets where there's going to be a need for another language like Spanish. Puerto Rico would be a market that would be like that. Other things that you would want in there is checklists for review of labeling content. Okay, here are guidance and regulatory requirements. It's actually standards and regulatory requirements. So 21 CFR 801 is where you find the FDA regulations for content of a label. That's where you find the prescription only requirement. Next is an ISO standard for information provided by the manufacturer. This includes what would go in a label and what would go in an instruction for use. That's an extremely valuable guidance, and it's internationally recognized, including the FDA is a recognized standard. ISO 15223-1 is the symbols standard. They have a new version, 2021. So both of those are very recent, and both of them have been recognized by the FDA. So you should be following that, and they're recognized by Europe. So it's one case where you have it meet both markets' requirements. Now, does that mean you don't need to do a regulatory checklist? No, you probably still need one. You absolutely need one for Europe. You absolutely need one for Canada, because their technical files require that you have essential principles of safety and performance, or in Europe's case, general safety and performance requirements. So they have a checklist typically showing how they meet the labeling requirements. I've indicated what sections those are in for the two different regulations. And we actually provide you with checklists that help you make sure your labels meet those two requirements included with this procedure. There are related procedures. They don't come with this, so when you buy this separately, you only get this, but you might see references to other important procedures. These are the three: technical documentation, translations, and medical device files. Translations used to be incorporated into this procedure. We split it out, made a much more detailed translation procedure because US companies don't need the translation most of the time. And it really wasn't adequate for companies that do need the translations. The technical documentation, that would be for European CE marking. If you want a broader procedure that's a little bit more generic, we have medical device file that's very similar to our procedure 25, but it's designed for companies that do business in Canada, US, and Australia. So it includes all the technical documentation according to the international guidance from IMDRF on technical documentation, or the those GHTF requirements was the previous acronym they used. Purpose and scope of the procedure. One of the things you'll notice here is we use exclamation points. The exclamation points help you search for where are the requirements for ISO 1345. If we use another symbol, it would be for another regulation, but we use symbols and color coding to help us identify where the requirements can be found. And you can search by Control F to search and find where all the requirements are located. We indicate that here with the blue color coding in the references relationships. We also have our other templates here. We also have the different checklists. We also have the different standards and regulations, and everything is currently up to date. Here's our flow chart. So you have your inputs and your outputs and the process in the middle. And as I said, you might have to update some things if they don't apply to your company. So if you're not doing business in Europe, you would delete all the things that say reference European requirements. For the revision history, we indicate who the author was and what the revision is. When it goes to 1.0, it's released. In this example, I had regulatory affairs and marketing approve this. Those are the two people that would normally approve the procedure. But if your regulatory affairs person is separate from the quality assurance person, you probably ought to add quality to this as well, because they need to be aware of the labeling procedure. Responsibilities and authorities. Once again, the two roles there I have that approve it, they're also responsible and have different responsibilities indicated here. The marketing people are typically looking at the formatting of the content and where it will be and how big it will be and what color it will be, what branding you'll use, what logos. Regulatory worries about the content and the claims. And there should always be a regulatory review of your website content, your instruction for use, and any advertising materials and your labels. That's a regulatory requirement that in the US. It's not well described that yes, you shall have that, but that is the requirement. And I've seen that written up by many FDA inspectors during the audit. They don't see a review of the website, and there's things on the website that shouldn't be there. I've broken down the procedure into several different slides. I'm not going to go into detail on this, but the first section covers labeling in general. It talks about creating the draft of the label, talks about having your checklist and using symbology wherever it's applicable. We highly recommend that, and you should have a glossary explaining the different symbols for people that don't know the standard. Most laypersons don't know that standard, never heard of it before, and often don't know what the different symbols mean. Even though they're internationally recognized, doesn't mean everybody knows what they are. This next section here talks a little bit more about symbols and how you're technically supposed to document them. Most of the time, all I see people put in is the symbol and what it means. But this is officially what European requirements would expect of you in accordance with ISO 15223-1. So they'd expect the symbol, the title of the symbol, the source of it, and the meaning of it. So it gives you a little bit more information that way. The next section here talks about testing and talks about the revision process and talks about UDI. So you might have testing to make sure people understand your labeling. That would be something that would be under formative testing. You have to know whether you're supposed to be, how you're supposed to be controlling changes. In general, we control procedures with a document change notice. We control labels with a change notice or an engineering change notice because it has regulatory requirements. Just like the design of a product, we cover labels the same way and control them very tightly. So we don't let you to review and approve labels with a document change notice that you would use for a procedure. Not all companies do it that way. Some have a document change process for everything, but that creates a problem when you need regulatory notification for significant changes. Then we have the UDI section, and we talk about usability and use-related risks. The UDI was up above. So this is, I don't see UDI here at all. Okay. UDI is covered in the checklist. I know it's covered there. There should be a place in your label where you actually have a UDI, but you need to make sure it's compliant with UDI requirements. So that comes, that applicable regulation is 21 CFR 830. And then you also have European requirements that are slightly different. But this section, I kept on seeing the U and thinking UDI, but it's actually URRA, so it's usability. And we talk about the durability and legibility. There are actually friction tests where they rub back and forth on the label to see if the label becomes illegible over time. This last two sections of the procedure talk about printing and control labels. This is probably the biggest weakness I see. People will pre-print a whole bunch of labels and then they will not control them. You need to control the labels. How many did you print? Where did you put them? Who has access to them? Those are important. Has it been reviewed and approved after printing? Did some of it smudge? Did you print it on the wrong label stock? Did you print it with the wrong ink? That matters. If you suddenly printed all your labels in red, people would wonder why. So if you printed them on the wrong label stock, they might rub right off during shipping. So those are important details. Ideally, you have a number that you printed out. Typically, it says print out the number you need for the lot plus one. The plus one is to add to your DHR. You attach it physically to your DHR if you have a physical DHR, or you attach a copy if it's a virtual one. And a lot of people just turn over the page and stick it on there. And then you have your other copies. Let's say it was a lot of 100. You have 100 labels. You apply each one. If you have any left over, that means one of two things. Either you made the wrong number of product or you printed the wrong number. If you decided, we don't have enough product to make 100 and we only have enough for 80, then you should have 20 labels left over. You should reconcile that. So there should be a reconciliation process where you count it. And then you should be scrapping those 20 extra labels and should be documenting that in the DHR. So those are the kinds of things we're talking about, printing control of labels. And so we had a section just for that. This section is very brief. It talks about how you know what translation the label is just by taking the exact same version and control number that you would have for English and just adding the two-letter suffix at the end for the language. So DE for German, FR for French, ES for Spanish. So that's what this procedure proposes. You could do it a different way, particularly if you only have a limited number of markets, but that's what we're proposing to help you keep track of. These are associated with this original English label, but we've also got a version in other languages. Then we have website content and advertising. So this would be something where you have regulatory approval, but marketing controls the release of the content and the look of the content, not the actual content. And then you have to make sure that it meets the requirements of the regulations. So you have to fill out the checklist. So this talks about that process a little bit. Then we have monitoring and measuring of our labeling process. So one of the things you would measure, how many lots did we print for? How many labels did we print? How many did we actually use? And the frequency of labeling errors. So whenever you discover a labeling error and you open up a nonconformity or a CAPA, you should have some data to look back on. So that's what we suggest for monitoring and measuring of the labeling process. Another thing you could look at is how long does it take to review and approval labels to figure out if your process is efficient enough and to anticipate how long it's going to take. Some companies have hundreds of pages to their instruction for use, and that's a big question. In this section, you'll see a TBD that's highlighted in yellow. That's because we haven't uploaded the training that I'm doing right now to our YouTube channel. We have a private YouTube channel just for sharing these videos. So after this is done, we will have that in that location, and we'll put that hyperlink in this procedure. In your procedure, you would delete this section if you don't want it in your procedure. But if you want people to follow this training or some other, you can use that method. So whenever you are looking for where do I find the video on how to revise and edit this procedure, please go to the training section and there's a hyperlink for you. So that's how you do it. And that's how we're going to be doing it for all our procedures. We have about 30 something videos that are already done. We have another 20 or so that need to be done in the future. So sometime this year, we'll have all the videos in our YouTube channel for you to look at. And we'll actually have a little screen capture of what the thumbnail looks like. Plus, you delete the red part if you're editing the procedure, unless you really want to keep it. And then right below that, it says retraining is required if the number before the decimal changes. If the number after the decimal changes, retraining is not required. So that's something that's the same in all of our procedures. And then right below that, we have a little table saying what training is required for each role and responsibility. Then we have a risk management section. That's also not required, but it's something we've added to all our procedures. It's our way of demonstrating the risk-based approach we've taken to the ISO 13485 system. So in here, we talk about the different checklists that we use for making sure we meet regulatory requirements and the use of symbols. The last section is the record section. So these are each of the different types of records that would be generated by this procedure. And then you would add a hyperlink wherever it says storage location. That's if you're using a virtual quality system. If you're using an electronic EQMS system, it will automatically put them in those locations. So you don't need that part because the system does it automatically. And if you have a manual system, instead of putting down a virtual location, you're going to put down a physical location. So that concludes our training on the labeling procedure. I hope this was helpful to you. And if you have any suggestions for improvement to this procedure or feedback on our new turnkey quality system implementation with Monday.com, please let me know. And I look forward to seeing you next week on the next training that we do on one of our procedures. See you then.